My name is Clara Hayes, and I'm 29 years old. In my family, a person's value was directly tied to their university degree. My mother was a surgeon, my father a celebrated author, and my brother an investment banker. I was the black sheep who quit college to launch a software startup. The moment I suggested at a family dinner that formal education wasn't the only path to success, my father erupted. "Get out of my house, you're a disgrace," he roared, jabbing a finger toward the door. What they didn't realize was that I was worth $28 million. The very next day, I moved into my villa on the Florida coast. Before I get into the rest of my story, I'd love to know where you're listening from, so drop a comment below. If you've ever felt like the underdog in your own family, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe to find out how I finally got the last word. I was raised in a sprawling, historic house in a Chicago suburb, a place where academic prowess wasn't just encouraged, it was the only currency that mattered. Our walls weren't decorated with vacation photos, but with framed degrees and academic honors. My father, Robert Hayes, was a critically acclaimed novelist and literature professor at a top university, and my mother, Helen, was a leading cardiothoracic surgeon at a major Chicago hospital. Their entire sense of self was built on their credentials and professional standing. My older brother, Marcus, was their crowning achievement. He graduated with top honors from Wharton and landed a high-flying job at a prestigious investment bank before he was even 26. At every family function, my parents would practically glow as they introduced him, always making sure to list his academic accolades and career milestones. "Our son, the banker," they'd say, their voices dripping with pride. And then there was me. From a young age, I was clearly wired differently. While my parents tried to get me interested in classic literature and chess, I was fascinated by computers and code. By the time I was 13, I had taught myself Python and was far more interested in the biographies of tech pioneers than in the literary canon. My family had this legacy of academic excellence stretching back generations. A great-grandfather who was a Rhodes Scholar, a grandmother with a PhD from Stanford. This tradition was non-negotiable. Excellence is a habit, Clara, not an act. My father would lecture me anytime a grade dropped to a B+. When I was 17, I started my first real venture, developing and selling custom plugins for small business websites. I'd spend entire weekends perfecting the code and building a simple online store. Within a few months, I was clearing over $600 a week. I remember showing my parents my sales dashboard, bubbling with excitement and expecting a little bit of praise. My father barely glanced at it. "A cute little project, Clara, but it's a distraction. It won't look nearly as good on a college application as a stellar GPA," he said. My mother, always a bit more tactful but just as dismissive, added, "Darling, these things are fine for now, but real achievement is built on a foundation of proper education." Despite my growing disenchantment with the traditional school system, I dutifully went through the motions of applying to colleges, mostly to keep the peace. I got into several great schools and picked a university with a renowned computer science department, telling myself I could somehow straddle the two worlds, the world of entrepreneurship that excited me and the world of academia that my parents demanded. During my second year of college, I met Dr. Alan Finch, an adjunct professor who'd founded and sold 2 successful software companies. He noticed me tinkering with a personal project after a lecture one day and stopped to ask about it. Unlike my other professors, who were obsessed with theory, Doctor, Finch asked about my market, my user acquisition strategy, and my plans for monetization. He was the first person in an academic environment who saw my business acumen as an asset, not a character flaw. "Your mind doesn't follow the textbook, Clara," he told me one afternoon. "That's your superpower, not your weakness." As I moved deeper into my degree program, the chasm between what I was learning in class and what I wanted to build in the real world grew wider. I started skipping classes to work on my own projects, and my grades inevitably began to slide. This led to increasingly strained phone calls with my parents. We are not spending over $30,000 a year for you to play around on your computer, my father snapped during one explosive call. Marcus never gave us these headaches. The comparison to Marcus was a constant sharp jab. He had flawlessly followed the blueprint they had laid out, while I was veering dangerously off course. At holiday get-togethers, relatives would quiz Marcus about his portfolio, then turn to me with a pitying smile and ask if I'd settled on a real career path yet. I tried to explain that some of the greatest innovators of our time had non-traditional backgrounds, but it only made them angrier. Those are statistical anomalies, Clara, not role models, my mother would argue. And with all due respect, you're not Steve Jobs. Little did she know, their relentless doubt wasn't crushing me. It was forging a will of iron. I kept going to classes, but my real life, the life that felt full of purpose and potential, began long after the lectures ended, fueled by caffeine and a desperate need to prove them all wrong. During the fall of my sophomore year, I had an epiphany for a financial planning app. The idea was born from my own struggles managing money and watching my friends graduate with massive debt and zero financial literacy. The existing apps were either overly complex for experts or insultingly simple. I imagined a platform that could evolve with the user, educating them as it helped them manage their finances. I started coding the prototype in my cramped dorm room, which quickly transformed into a command center of sticky notes, whiteboards, and a growing pyramid of empty energy drink cans. My roommate, Sophie, watched with growing alarm as I pulled all-nighters, coding until dawn only to stumble to my 8 a.m. class looking like a zombie. "You're going to crash and burn," she warned, but I had never felt more energized. As my obsession with the project deepened, my academic performance cratered. My midterm grades were a bloodbath. I got my first ever D in a core programming class and failed advanced mathematics outright. When my academic dean sent an email requesting an immediate meeting, I knew the moment of truth had arrived. Before that meeting, I booked some time with Dr. Finch, who had become my unofficial mentor. I walked him through my prototype and laid out my dilemma. I expected a lecture about responsibility, but instead, he drilled down into my business plan, my target demographics, and my revenue model. After nearly an hour, he leaned back, a thoughtful expression on his face, and said the words that would alter the course of my life. "Clara, I believe you have a real winner here. If you're truly committed to this, I'm prepared to offer $40,000 in seed capital." I was stunned. "Are you serious?" "Completely. But you have to understand the commitment this requires. You can't build a company while trying to placate your parents with passing grades. It's all or nothing." That night was sleepless. By sunrise, my decision was made. I was dropping out to go all in on my company. I knew my parents would be apoplectic, but for the first time in my entire life, I felt a sense of absolute certainty about my future. I waited until that weekend and drove the 2 hours home to Chicago to tell them in person. I had prepared everything: a full presentation on my business plan, detailed market analysis, financial forecasts, and Dr. Finch's letter of intent as proof that a seasoned professional believed in me. My parents, brother, and his wife sat around the dining room table, the very stage for years of academic pressure, and listened in stony silence. When I finished, the quiet was heavy, suffocating. Finally, my father spoke, his voice low and quivering with rage. "So this is it. You're throwing away your education, everything we've sacrificed for." "I'm not throwing anything away," I countered. "I'm choosing a different path, a path to failure," he suddenly roared, his fist hitting the table with a deafening crack. "Do you have any idea what the real world does to college dropouts without connections or credentials? You'll be nothing." My mother, who usually played the peacemaker, was just as severe. "Clara, this is profound immaturity. You've always chased instant results instead of doing the long, hard work. This is the hardest I've ever worked on anything," I protested. Marcus, ever the smug banker, chimed in. "Clara, be reasonable. Viable careers require a formal education. This startup idea is a pipe dream. 90% of them fail. Then I'll be in the 10% that makes it, I said, my voice shaking but firm. My father stood up, his face a mask of fury. No child of mine will be a dropout. If you walk out that door to pursue this fantasy, you are cut off. No more money, no support, nothing. I had expected it, but the finality of his words was a punch to the gut. I understand, I managed to say. I've already found a new place to live. The next morning, as I loaded boxes into my beat-up sedan, my mother came out, her eyes swollen. Please, just reconsider, she pleaded. Finish your degree. Then you can do all of this. I can't wait, Mom, I said. The time is now. As I pulled away from the house I grew up in, a terrifying and exhilarating sense of freedom washed over me. I moved into a tiny 2-bedroom apartment with Sophie, who was one of the only people cheering me on. It was in a gritty part of the city, a world away from my parents' manicured suburb. Those first few months were a brutal grind. Dr. Finch's seed money barely covered the initial tech infrastructure and a few months of rent. I survived on instant noodles and cheap coffee, routinely working 18-hour days to get the app, which I'd named Navify, off the ground. Sophie, who was waiting tables while chasing her acting dreams, would bring home leftover bread from her restaurant. There were dark moments of doubt late at night when a line of code wouldn't compile and my bank balance was terrifyingly low, when I wondered if my family was right. Maybe I was just a delusional kid who'd thrown away a golden opportunity. Then, the first glimmer of light. 4 months in, we launched the beta version of Navify. In 3 weeks, we had 5,000 users and overwhelmingly positive reviews. A small tech blog wrote a feature on us, and that led to another 10,000 downloads overnight. When Dr. Finch shared our user metrics with his network, a pair of angel investors wanted to talk. That small victory was like a shot of adrenaline to the heart. It was proof. I was building something real, something that helped people. For the first time since leaving home, I let myself believe I'd made the right call. The next 3 years were a whirlwind of sleepless nights, euphoric wins, and soul-crushing setbacks. Building a company from the ground up was harder than any exam I'd ever studied for. There were no syllabi, no office hours. The market was my professor and its lessons were harsh. I expanded Navify from a simple budgeting tool to a comprehensive platform with investment advice, credit tracking, and automated savings goals. I hired 2 more developers, paying them a mix of cash and equity because money was still tight. Despite our growing user base, revenue was a slow climb. Our freemium model was a tough sell. Converting free users into paying subscribers was a constant battle. Some months, I genuinely didn't know if I'd make payroll. Sophie was my anchor through it all. On my worst days, she'd physically pull me away from my laptop, insisting we go for a walk or watch a cheesy movie. "This company dies if you have a complete mental breakdown," she'd say. And she was right. Even as the business started to stabilize, I lived like a broke student. While my business account grew, I stayed in that same cheap apartment, driving the same old car. Every spare cent was reinvested. My parents interpreted this frugality as failure, which only hardened their belief that I'd ruined my life. On the rare occasions I saw them, they'd make pointed remarks about job security and 401ks, hoping I'd finally cave. I kept quiet about my progress, partly out of pride, and partly because I just didn't have the energy for the drama. The real breakthrough came in year 3. My small data science team developed a predictive algorithm for market analysis that was stunningly accurate. This supercharged our investment feature, delivering incredible returns for our users. Word of mouth went viral. Our user base exploded from 50,000 to over 500,000 in just 4 months. The revenue finally caught up, and we were solidly profitable. A major tech journal featured Navify in their Startups to Watch issue, and suddenly venture capital firms were calling. By the time I turned 25, I had closed a $10 million Series A funding round at a $30 million valuation. My personal stake in the company had made me a multi-millionaire, at least on paper. The terrified college dropout was now the CEO of a 30-person company, and my family had no idea. To them, I was still the wayward daughter, chasing a childish dream. The pace was relentless. I was flying across the country for meetings with executives who treated me as an equal. The dissonance between how the business world saw me and how my family saw me was jarring. It all came to a head about 4 years in. After a grueling 72-hour coding marathon for a critical product update, I collapsed in my office from what my doctor called an anxiety-induced breakdown. Sophie found me curled up under my desk, sobbing and hyperventilating. That was my wake-up call. I hired a seasoned COO to manage daily operations and force myself to delegate. For the first time in years, I took a real vacation, renting a quiet beach house in Florida. The serenity of the ocean was healing, and it planted a seed. Shortly after I turned 28, a financial tech giant came to us with an acquisition offer that was impossible to ignore. $28 million with the condition that I stay on for 2 years to oversee the transition. After long talks with my board, I decided to sell. The day we signed the papers was surreal. I sat in a glass-walled boardroom, surrounded by suits, signing documents that transferred my creation to its new home, while an almost absurd amount of money was wired to my personal account. With a portion of that money, I made a call. I bought a $6.5 million beachfront villa in Florida, a sanctuary that was my reward for all the sacrifice. But I didn't tell my family. A stubborn part of me was still waiting, hoping they would see my success for themselves without me having to shove it in their faces. After the sale of Navify, I was at a strange inflection point. My identity was so tied to being a founder. Now, with more money than I could ever spend and only part-time obligations, I had space to think about my life, including my shattered family relationships. So when my mother called to invite me to a family dinner celebrating Marcus's promotion to managing director at his firm, I heard myself say yes. Maybe it was time to try again. Or maybe I was just finally strong enough not to care what they thought. The dinner was at my parents' house. I chose my outfit carefully, a simple, elegant dress that whispered confidence, not wealth. As I pulled into the familiar driveway, my stomach was in knots. Through the window, I could see them all, a perfect portrait of the life I had rejected. My mother's hug was brief and a little stiff. "Clara, you came. We're in the dining room." The good silver was out, a clear signal of the event's importance. My father offered a clipped nod. Marcus was there with his wife, Tiffany, both radiating a kind of smug, expensive success. "Look what the cat dragged in," Marcus said with a smirk. "We were just talking about my new office. It has a view of the lake." "Congratulations, Marcus." "That's a huge accomplishment," I said genuinely. He seemed taken aback by my sincerity. "Thanks. I wasn't sure you'd get what a big deal it is in our world." And just like that, the familiar condescension was back. Dinner started with a toast from my father to the continuation of the Hayes family legacy of achievement, his eyes deliberately avoiding mine. My mother asked me superficial questions, her attention always snapping back to Marcus. I kept my answers vague. "So how's that little computer thing of yours going?" my father finally asked, the dismissive tone in his voice making my skin prickle. "It's been going well," I said evenly. "We've had some significant growth." "But growth doesn't pay the mortgage, does it?" Marcus chimed in. "What's your actual revenue stream?" I started to explain our subscription tiers and enterprise-level solutions, but his eyes glazed over. "Clara was always the creative one," my mother said, as if that was a consolation prize for a failed career. "Remember those little websites she used to build?" Tiffany, who had been mostly silent, added, "I love that dress, Clara. Isn't it amazing what you can find at those outlet malls now?" The insult was so blatant it was almost funny. I just smiled. "Thank you. How's the market treating you?" "I heard you had to delist that big condo development downtown." Her smile faltered. "Just a minor market correction. Unlike some fields, real estate requires actual licenses and credentials. It gives clients peace of mind." The digs kept coming all night. I held my composure, a silent mantra running through my head. Their words don't define you. But it was exhausting. As dessert arrived, my father delivered what was clearly his main objective for the evening. "Clara, your mother and I think it's time you came back to reality. It's not too late to go back to school. You could probably finish your degree in a year or two. I appreciate the thought, Dad. But I'm really happy with my career." "What career?" he scoffed. "Running some app that will be irrelevant in 6 months isn't a career. It's a hobby." "Robert," my mother cautioned, "we were going to be supportive." "Supportive of what? Our daughter throwing her life away? The tech world is a lottery. You're up one day and you're broke and unemployable the next with no degree to fall back on." I took a slow sip of water. Success isn't one size fits all. A degree is a great path, but it's not the only one. Marcus leaned in. "Clara, Dad is right. What's your 5-year plan? You're 29. You should have a 401k, a stable job. I could see if my firm has any admin positions open. The pay isn't great, but the benefits are solid." That offer, so dripping with condescension, was the final straw. Years of being dismissed, of being the family failure, of hiding my own incredible journey, it all boiled over. "I appreciate the offer, Marcus, but I'm doing okay. Better than okay, actually." "Define okay," my father challenged. "Because from my perspective, okay means a completed education and a respectable job. Not everyone measures success your way, Dad. Some of us build our own opportunities. And where has that gotten you? A tiny rental apartment and a job with zero security?" "Actually," I said, my voice suddenly calm and clear, "it got me to the point where I just sold my company for $28 million. The silence was absolute. 4 pairs of eyes stared at me as if I'd just grown a second head. My mother was the first to speak. "That's not a very funny joke, Clara. It's not a joke. I finalized the sale last month. The acquiring company is keeping me on as a consultant, but for all intents and purposes, I'm retired." My father's face had gone pale. If this is some sort of pathetic lie to make yourself feel better, why would I lie? You can look it up. The deal was covered in the business journals. Marcus was already furiously typing on his phone. A moment later, his jaw dropped. "Oh my God, she's telling the truth. It's right here." He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a completely new kind of awareness. "You're the founder from the article." My father just shook his head, unable to process it. "So you got lucky. A 1 in a million fluke doesn't justify quitting school. It wasn't luck, Dad. It was 4 years of 80-hour work weeks. It was learning and failing and getting back up again. It was work, just not the kind you recognize." "And what now? You think a pile of money makes you a success? There's more to life than a quick payday." "I completely agree," I said, "which is why I'm also endowing a foundation to provide grants and mentorship to young entrepreneurs who can't afford a traditional university path. Because a good idea shouldn't be limited by a person's background." That's when he finally broke. He shot to his feet, his chair crashing backward. That is precisely the kind of irresponsible, destructive attitude that is undermining the value of education. You get lucky one time, and now you think you know better than centuries of academic tradition? I'm not saying it has no value, I'm just saying, "Get out of my house, you're a disgrace," he bellowed, pointing a trembling finger at the door. "If you came here to flaunt your money and mock your brother's hard-earned success, you can leave right now." The room went silent. My mother looked horrified. Marcus looked deeply uncomfortable, and Tiffany was visibly recalculating my net worth in her head. I didn't say another word. I just stood up, placed my napkin on the table, and walked out. As I drove away, a strange mix of profound hurt and exhilarating liberation washed over me. The last illusion was gone. No amount of success would ever be enough for my father if it didn't come with the right piece of paper. That night, in a hotel room, I made a decision. It was time to stop hiding. The next morning, I was flying to Florida. I spent a fitful night in that hotel, the echoes of my father's words replaying in my head. But when I woke up, a surprising sense of clarity had settled over me. The confrontation was a painful but necessary amputation. For years, I'd been trying to get validation from a family that was fundamentally incapable of seeing me. Over breakfast, I called my realtor, Natalie. "Is the house ready?" "Everything's perfect," she said brightly. "The cleaners just left. Furniture is all in place. When are you coming down?" "Today," I said, the decision solidifying as I spoke. "I'm booking a flight now." Next, I called Sophie. "How'd it go?" she asked, already knowing. I gave her the short, disastrous version, ending with my decision to move to Florida immediately. "Are you running away or running towards something?" she asked, with her typical, beautiful directness. "Maybe both. I just need a clean break, a new start where I'm not waiting for an approval that's never coming." "Then go for it," she said. "But you're my first house guest? Deal?" "Deal." After booking my flight, I called my assistant to arrange for my apartment to be packed up and my belongings shipped. Then I checked out and went to the airport. For the first time in my life, I bought a first-class ticket. It felt like a small but significant acknowledgement of everything I had earned. As I settled into the plush seat, a weight I didn't even realize I was carrying began to lift. 3 hours later, I landed in Florida. The warm, humid air felt like a welcome embrace. A car I'd arranged was waiting, and as we drove along the palm-lined coastal highway, a feeling of pure, unadulterated excitement started to build. This was more than a new house. It was a new life. The car turned onto a private drive that hugged the coastline, stopping at an imposing gate. The driver keyed in the code, and the gate swung open, revealing a sweeping driveway leading to a stunning modern villa. Seeing it in person for the first time took my breath away. It was a masterpiece of glass and white stone, with an infinity pool that seemed to spill directly into the turquoise ocean. Natalie was there to greet me. "Welcome home, Clara," she said with a huge grin. The inside was even better. Soaring ceilings, cool marble floors, and an entire wall of glass that framed a panoramic view of the sea. "The office is all set up," Natalie said, leading me to a room with a massive desk facing the ocean. It was perfect. After she left, I wandered through the silent, magnificent space. It was mine. All of it. I had earned this. I changed into a sundress, poured a glass of wine, and walked out onto the terrace. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple, a profound sense of peace washed over me. The next morning, I woke to the sound of waves. No alarm needed. I spent the first few days just exploring. I found a local coffee shop, a farmer's market, and quiet hiking trails. It was a world away from the high-stakes pressure I'd lived in for so long. On the third day, I met my neighbor, Judith, a sharp, funny, retired CEO in her 60s. She invited me over for sunset cocktails, which soon became a regular ritual. "The hardest part isn't building the empire," she told me one evening. "It's learning who you are after the war is won." A week later, Sophie flew down. She stepped out of the cab and just stared at the house. "Holy cow, Clara, you said it was nice. This is a fortress of solitude." I gave her the tour, feeling a little self-conscious. "Is it too much?" I asked. "Are you kidding?" she said, grabbing my arm. "You earned every single square foot. I'm so incredibly proud of you." Her validation meant more to me than any bank statement. After she left, I started sketching out plans for my next chapter. The idea for the foundation began to take shape. Not just funding, but real mentorship for kids like me who didn't fit the traditional mold. One evening, feeling bold, I finally did it. I updated my professional networking profiles with the acquisition details and posted a photo of myself on the terrace. A simple caption: "The next chapter." The messages poured in. Among them was a note from an old boyfriend from college who had ghosted me after I dropped out. "Clara, just saw the news. Wow, I was an idiot. Congratulations on proving everyone wrong." I smiled. I hadn't done it to prove anyone wrong. I had done it to prove myself right. 3 weeks after my move, a prominent business magazine published a deep dive feature on the Navi Fi acquisition. It detailed the $28 million sale and profiled me as the founder. The article went viral. My phone rang. It was my mother. Clara, her voice was thin and shaky. I just saw an article. Is it true? All of it? Yes, Mom, it's true. There was a long silence. Why didn't you tell us? Before the dinner? Would it have mattered? Would Dad have respected me if he'd known I was wealthy? That's not fair. No, I said quietly. What wasn't fair was judging me for years without ever trying to understand my path. Another pause. Where are you? I bought a house in Florida. On the beach. Florida? The shock in her voice was genuine. Your father and we feel awful about what happened. We were wondering, could we visit? To talk. The request stunned me. They had never once visited me in my rundown city apartment. Now they wanted to fly to Florida. After a long talk with Sophie, I decided to say yes. I called my mom back and invited them all, Marcus and Tiffany included, for the following weekend. I prepared for their arrival like a general preparing for battle. Sophie flew down for moral support. I watched on the security feed as their rental car pulled up to the gate. I met them on the front steps, Sophie at my side. The looks on their faces were a mixture of shock and disbelief. My mother's mouth was literally agape. My father just stood there holding his suitcase, looking lost. Welcome to my home, I said. This is all yours? My father stammered. I gave them the tour. With every room, the gourmet kitchen, the home theater, my ocean view office, their silence grew deeper. The tour ended on the terrace. A toast, I said, raising a glass of champagne, to family. We drank in awkward silence. Finally, my mother spoke. Clara, we had no idea. Would you have believed me if I'd told you? Of course, my father blurted out unconvincingly. Really? Because when I did tell you, you called me a liar and threw me out. He flinched. I may have overreacted. May have, my mother cut in. Robert, we agreed. We would be honest. Clara, we were wrong. Your father and I have been forced to confront how we've treated you. We saw you as a failure because you didn't follow our path, and all along you were building this. For what it's worth, Marcus said, looking at me with newfound respect, I'm impressed. I wouldn't have had the guts to take that risk. It's not about the money, Marcus. It's about respect. You want respect? Fine, my father said, his voice strained. I respect what you've built, but that doesn't mean I was wrong about the importance of a degree. I never said it wasn't important, I countered. I just said, it's not the only way. Easy for you to say. You're the exception. For every one of you, there are 1,000 dropouts flipping burgers, which is exactly why my foundation exists, to help change those odds. The conversation continued like that through dinner. Tense, but for the first time, productive. They were actually listening. Later, as we walked on the beach, my mother apologized, her voice thick with emotion. I was so focused on the life I wanted for you, I couldn't see the incredible life you were building for yourself. The next morning, I found my father on the terrace alone, watching the sunrise. You did well, he said without looking at me. I was wrong about you. It wasn't the flowery apology I once might have dreamed of, but coming from him, it was everything. 6 months after that visit, our relationships were transformed. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. My father and I now have weekly calls where he asks me about business strategy. He admitted my journey had forced him to reevaluate his own rigid worldview. My mother became my biggest cheerleader. Marcus and I finally have a real sibling relationship, and he even refers potential entrepreneurs to my foundation, which is now thriving. Through a foundation event, I met Leo, an architect who is brilliant, kind, and completely unthreatened by my success. Last month, I hosted a holiday party at my villa. My parents, my brother, and his wife, Sophie, Judith, Leo, and several of the young entrepreneurs my foundation is funding all gathered on my terrace. I watched my father in a deep, animated conversation with a 20-year-old kid who'd built an app without a day of college, and I felt a sense of profound peace. Later, as my mother gave a toast to Clara, who had the courage to teach us all a new way to see success, my father caught my eye from across the terrace and gave me a small, proud nod. That nod, more than the money or the house, felt like victory. It was the validation I had stopped searching for, and in doing so, had finally received. So now I want to ask you, have you ever had to fight for your own path against the expectations of others? How did you find the strength to believe in yourself when no one else did? Share your stories in the comments. If my journey resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about resilience and forging your own way. Because in the end, the most important credential you can have is believing in yourself. Thank you for listening. End of story.